economics. So as I have spoken to some of the senators about this, I said, we're going to take this. The funding will come from the Department of Education.
So let's talk free speech. Senator McMahon is a corrupt billionaire donor who knows nothing about it.
Apparently, it's the CCP didn't like that. They're cutting into our technology.
We're getting a little feedback in here.
I think it was a few of the liberal senators in connection with the CCP thought they'd try and cut into that.
So, you know, what's interesting is that when I talked to the senators and I said, let me show you how this will work. We'll take this program out of the Department of Labor, out of education, we'll put it into the Department of Labor. We'll make sure that you understand what we're going to be able to accomplish by that. And the Senate then actually has to vote on moving that one program from Department of Education permanently into the Department of Labor. So I said, we'll do it some pieces at the time, big pieces. And they, you know what, I've gotten some buy-in to that.
Nice.
I hope, I said, let's just look at how it can be effective. And so I've had a couple of senators who've said, well, that just makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Seems to be common sense. I'm going, you're right, just common sense. So that's really what we're trying to do. And we're trying to streamline it, trying to take away a lot of the regulatory environment. I mean, you know from being a governor how much red tape goes along with the funding that comes back to the states. And probably most of you in here know that 90% of the cost of education in states is borne by the states, most of the time through property taxes or other kinds of taxes. So the federal government provides, some cases, 8%, 10%, sometimes as high as 12%. But if you think about it in totality, that's really a very small part. But all of the regulations almost attached to that money come from the federal government. To the extent that I heard that I was given a statistic the other day, that out of every dollar that comes into the classroom, about 47 cents is spent on regulatory compliance. Well, let's let that money go to the students and go to the states and higher teacher salaries and those things that can make a difference in those states. And so that's what we're going to be trying to do.
Well, and it's really, yeah. I just remind everybody, because as you talk about this point, if this debate comes up on your campus or your communities, just to echo what the Secretary said, it's about 90% is not coming from the federal government. So that means it's from the state government or the local property taxpayer or some other set of revenues. It's not from the federal government. Yet there's all these regulations that are handed down from Washington back not only to the states, but to the local governments. I did have to chuckle when that interference came in, knowing a thing or two about taking on big government special interests like you're going to have to do with this. We had about 100,000 protesters in our capital for about a month, and there were a lot of interchanges like that as well, because same people. The people who were defenders of the status quo didn't want us to go ahead with common sense, and the good news is many years later, there's been survey after report that showed that educational attainment actually went up after the reforms that we did in Wisconsin, and presumably I think the same thing would be true the more we sent those responsibilities back to the states, the schools, and the parents.
Well, and I bet you would attest to this, that governors are competitive.
Yes.
They want their state to do well. So if another state is outperforming what you're doing in your state, you take a look at what they're doing. How does that work? The state of Mississippi, just a few years ago, implemented what was called the science of reading. Yeah. They went back to teaching phonetics and looking at outcomes. And they had what was called the Mississippi Miracle. They went from number 50 in education literacy development up to about number 30-something to start with. And then they're making progress, all along. Louisiana has adopted it. Florida has adopted the science of reading. Iowa now. Many other states have as well. And they are seeing their national report card called the NAEP scores go up. Now, I bet you might have heard this statistic, but it's incredible to me that currently in our country, that 8th graders, only 30% of 8th graders are reading proficiently. Yeah. 30%. That means 70% are not. And a little bit less than that are math proficient. Mm-hmm. So we have to get these scores up. We are way, way down the list internationally as well. And when President Trump came in and saw those scores that came out shortly after he won the election, he said, this has to change. This is embarrassing. And he was angry about it. So not only did he charge me that we have to close down the Department of Education, and when, I'll just take a little side note, when I was being confirmed, Senate confirmed for the position, I was really attacked a little bit by some of the senators who were saying, so what are you actually going to be doing? Why would you close down the Department of Education? And I said, Senator, clearly something that we're doing is not working. We've spent $3 trillion since the Department of Education was established, and we've seen our performance scores occasionally tick up a little bit by and large there. The graph has gone like this. We're not doing something right. Let's make sure that we are changing what we're doing. I'm so happy we're getting to share this feed.
Yeah, I said it's the wonders of hacking, apparently, in the world of free speech. These folks on campus have dealt with this before. If liberals don't like your ideas, they try and shut you down. But these students know if you're under attack, the F's got your back. And even here on this stage, we're not going to back down from the truth. That's what folks do when they have poor ideas. They just try to power everybody else. And even when it comes to hacking into a system, we're not going to let that happen. But
it goes a little bit along with this, not quite the same thing, but I remember my mother telling me one time when I wasn't being very articulate and I was swearing. And now and then, but my mother told me, she said, using swearing instead of really good words is the mark of a vocabulary cripple. So I thought, okay, well.
We know here that, again, this is the sort of thing we've dealt with time and time again, but I'm curious, we talk about, you just talked about reading scores, and one of the things I saw as a governor was if you go from learning to read from about 6 months on until about 3rd or 4th grade, and then from that point, the rest of your time in school, you use reading to learn. And students, sadly, if they're behind on those scores, end up dropping out and all sorts of challenges there. So what sorts of things we do? One of the things we talked about backstage that you and I have talked about before is education freedom. That not only improving our traditional government-run schools, but giving families and particularly students choices, giving them options in education. What more can we do to promote really the idea that the funding should follow the student and not the system?
Right. Well, absolutely, and President Trump is just absolutely committed to school choice. He doesn't believe that any child should be trapped in a failing school. And in the big beautiful bill, there was about $60 million put in, first of all, for the remainder of the spending of this school year, and then ongoing, increasing the budget for school choice up to now about $500 million. That's a significant amount of money to give students choice. And as you and I discussed, it was the silver lining of COVID that parents, for the first time, were able to see the kinds of curriculum that students had in their school. There was a lot of, there was a lot of DEI, there was a lot of wokeness in the curriculum. And so it was incredibly eye-opening, to parents who saw that. And so they wanted to make sure that they had more control over the curriculum in their schools. And so for the first time, they were attending board meetings. They were doing a lot of the things that made them involved in what their children's education was. And so that was incredibly important. And I urge parents, go to school board meetings, run for the school board so that you can have impact in what your children are doing, because that is incredibly important.